So the second video in agriculture, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the second agricultural revolution. So we got all these different agricultural revolutions. What's the difference between the first and the second and the third? And why are there three of them? And what's the difference? And so we're going to spend a little bit of time today checking out these differences and trying to find out how it applies to us. And so first and foremost, let's take a look at the second agricultural revolution. Well, if you have watched my videos on population and the demographic transition and all this, that, and the other, you already know that the second agricultural revolution comes just before the industrial revolution, which is arguably the most important of these revolutions that we've had in the modern world. I guess in modern world history for sure. Starting in about the 1750s, people developed techniques that allowed them to mass produce just about any consumable item they needed over time. And today, my webcam is mass-produced. My computer is mass-produced. My lights are mass-produced. My baby's table and chairs and tricycle and kitchen. And yes, I am in my kid's room right now. All these things are actually mass-produced because of possibilities of the Industrial Revolution. But the Industrial Revolution could not have happened without the second agricultural revolution preceding it for several reasons. So let's take it from square one and figure out what's going down here. So what is going down here? You got the second agricultural revolution, where Great Britain in particular, because they're always kind of the ones who start everything off until lately, really the highlights or headlines that highlight how Great Britain is kind of falling off the map here in terms of modern geopolitics, which is kind of a weird, almost disappointing kind of mentality. As powerful as they were going into the Industrial Revolution, but Great Britain actually had never dealt with fighting or real actual like devastating fighting and land ravaging violence on their land. Now wait a second. I know they fought the American Revolution. They fought against Napoleon. They fought the French Indian War before that, and the 7 Years' War is what it was called in Europe. And these guys have been in some wars with the French in particular. But none of those wars actually happened on British soil because it was very hard to invade Great Britain. You gotta have a powerful navy, and it just so happens that, oh well, Great Britain kind of had that too. And so you really can't do much against the strongest naval power in the world when they are a sea away, because it's kind of like fighting someone who's really good at climbing a mountain at the top of a mountain. They're going to get there first, and they're going to not get down every time. And Napoleon figured this out the hard way, and Hitler figured this out the hard way. Everyone figured this out the hard way. So this allows rich people to develop what they call enclosures during the second agricultural revolution. And really, the main thing I want you to know about what an enclosure is mainly, predominantly, a large, closed-off, fenced-in area owned by a rich dude who has time and money to practice new farming techniques. And what they can do for the first time ever is they can actually develop strategies to increase yields. And so that's what the second agricultural revolution is all about. So what are some things these guys were doing to increase yields? First of all, you've got Jethro Tull and the seed drill. Using his seed drill, he was able to more efficiently put seeds in the ground. You know what? I just seeded my backyard a couple of days ago with grass, because I can't even get grass to grow in the backyard because the trees form a canopy and they kill all my grass. So all I did was I just took my my Scott's distributor thing and just put a bunch of seeds in there and sprinkled it all over the yard. But that's probably not going to work because of several things. First of all, birds are going to take my seeds and eat them. All right, that sucks, but it's going to happen. And then number two, most of the seeds are going to be like mulch for the actual seeds that do catch hold, because my ground is tough and hard, and I didn't do anything to make the seeds actually go under it. So most of my seeds are going to just probably sit on top of the yard and get eaten or wasted or trampled by my dog. And that's kind of lame. But what you see the seed drill did is it would actually kind of fit the seeds into a slightly buried land that would allow more seeds to take hold, so you could grow more crops with less seeds. That's efficiency, brother, and it leads to less cost and more yields. And if you speak economics, that means people are making more money and commercial agriculture starts to emerge. That's really important, because what it does is it puts a lot of farmers out of a job. Wait a second, actually, that's not cool, but it is at the same time, because what it does is it inadvertently creates a labor pool of people that can be your new factory workers. Because what's going on at the same time? People start to develop new industrial machines that can spin bobbins and allow people to use what is called a hand loom to make their clothes. Well, the cool thing about this is that sooner or later, you've got a ton of people that have a job, and you've got more inventiveness and more time and more freedom from violence and stuff like this going on, and people start to figure out, well, we can probably make a machine that creates the textiles that you make clothes out of to save people a ton of time. And so the textile industry was the first to take off and get tremendously overhauled and very efficient and productive. And it couldn't have happened, I'm not going to get into the Industrial Revolution right now, but it couldn't have happened if it wasn't for that excess food being produced that could support a population and put tons of farmers out of business so that they could be your new factory workers. So less people began producing more food. That's the second agricultural revolution, that led and paved the way to industrial revolution. A couple of other things that I want you to know is Cyrus McCormick's mechanical reaper, which increased the efficiency of harvesting, and also different types of breeding technology. For example, not even really technology, but this experimentation that led people to understand that if you take your fattest cattle or your fattest sheep and you breed them, you're going to get more fatties. And more fatties means more meat, and so people were able to increase the size of domesticated farm animals to make more meat for people, and once again this increased yields and increased food with less. And so, as if the Industrial Revolution didn't already piggyback on the second agricultural revolution, which is really a long past overdue adaptation of the first agricultural revolution, what we start seeing is how the Green Revolution, or the third agricultural revolution, actually piggybacks on the industrial and medical revolutions. That's right, we're all interconnected in the circle of life. What's going on here? First of all, Thomas Malthus, we remember this guy, others like him as well, thought that we were going to breed ourselves out of existence. And it just so happens that it looked pretty bad. In the early 1900s, populations reached about, before that 1 billion mark, and then eventually the 2 billion mark, and then by like the 1930s, we're at the or somewhere around the 3 billion mark, and everyone's like, we can't sustain this kind of growth. Well, people kind of were starving in certain places on the earth, and India was one of them, and other developing countries were some of those places where mass starvation was kind of the norm. And so a few scientists in the American Midwest start to experiment with ways to increase crop yields again. And this time, it's not by little techniques like the seed drill or breeding your fattest sheep. We've already done that to the point where there's not much more we can do. What they start doing is they start trying to use technology to manipulate and almost kind of like mutate seed varieties. Maybe mutate is too harsh, but they wanted to change the structure biologically of seeds to increase higher yields with like less water and stuff. And so one way they did this was to create, for example, pest resistant, like drought resistant, like rice seeds that were also a little bit bigger, that were able to help with starvation issues in Southeast Asia, in particular in South Asia and India, where it actually kind of worked. And next thing you know, your mass starvation issue in this large populous country starts to kind of dwindle down to the point where they're kind of making it. And so scientists kind of thought, hey, if the Green Revolution can work here, it can work just about anywhere, right? And that would kind of be a Western form of thought, because we've always kind of thought what works for us or what works for the few will work for the many. I'm not kind of bashing us for that mentality, but it is kind of the way we are, and it hasn't really worked as well in places like Africa, for example, where the infrastructure isn't there, where people can't afford technology for Green Revolution crops, and people are still largely trying to work with subsistence agriculture and not commercial agriculture. And in some places they are, but in those places they're starving because they're not making food for themselves, they're making food for everybody else. And so it kind of is like a catch-22 here. So, looking further at the Green Revolution, what are some possible problems with this? Well, we know something about mutations, and over time, if we can mutate crops, well, and make them pest resistant, for example, and stuff like that, well, next thing you know, pests are going to start to mutate too, and they do. And so we've kind of created what some Green Revolution or Third Agricultural Revolution critics would call super pests. And so some pests are becoming Green Revolution resistant, so that the new pesticides and things like that that people have tried to implement to help crops grow better really have led to more poison resistant bugs, which sucks for everybody. Also, there is an issue with and here's a geography term for you, monocropping, where individuals will plant one thing like all over the place forever. And the reason why they do this is because there's money in that one crop that can be made. And so people kind of once again stop focusing on subsistence agriculture that will sustain themselves and family, and they start growing this one crop, which tears up the soil and also sometimes can cause changes even in the climate or even in the environment around them, and deal out some serious pollution or deal out some serious environmental hazards of some sort. And so these are all issues that Green Revolution scientists are super concerned about, that they think are factors we need to figure out quick how to overcome in places where the Green Revolution is important. So wrapping it up, bringing it together, tying all the loose ends, what we have here is after the Second Agricultural Revolution, we start to see where imperial powers, colonial countries in Europe, they are taking over and exploiting natives in other places like Africa and India in particular, and other places in Southeast Asia and China and anywhere they went. They began to try to modernize economies altogether, but they wanted predominantly to fuel their own industrial needs through the production of raw materials. And so what these guys would do is they would kind of, between the 1500s all the way up until the end of imperialism in the 1900s, they would work really hard to force on these natives a particular crop that they thought was important for their own production, and then resell manufactured goods to these colonial peoples. And so what you see here is a lasting legacy, oftentimes, of European imperialism, where even today, a lot of these places that were former imperial powers, imperial possessions rather, start to or continue to produce the same crops that they were doing, and continue to work in monoculture and commercial agriculture, rather than the much needed subsistence farming that predominantly would go on before imperial powers showed their face in other places of the world. And so largely some of these places are still very much how they were under imperial possession. Another thing too that you tend to see is that some places today still do practice tons of subsistence farming, and many of these places are peasants, if you will, exist in places like Africa, Southeast Asia, where these people are still working at trying to grow crops for the sake of their own survival. And they're not selling too much, they're mainly consuming what they make. And so we're going to discuss later on some of the differences between extensive and intensive subsistence farming. And we're going to look a little bit closer at commercial and commercial agriculture and the different ways that manifests itself as well. So I hope you're getting something out of this and learn a little bit about agriculture, how it impacts you, and we will continue to develop this subject. Thank you. Hi there. In this last video, I want to talk to you a little bit about the impact geographically that agriculture has on the world around us. How has it shaped the cultural landscape, and how has it changed the look and feel of the places that we call home all over the earth? And so, in order to do this, the first thing I kind of want to do is look at the United States of America, where two particular types of survey systems have come into play over the course or the history of our nation. The first of these, and the kind that the eastern United States kind of resembles the most, is known as the meets and bounds system. What that means is that people typically would survey the boundaries between states and villages or whatnot by landmarks and physical boundaries and features. And so in some cases, this could get actually quite confusing, and it was always kind of hard to know exactly where the boundaries really were because they were kind of open to interpretation, and sometimes the instructions that differentiate between one place and another was so complex that nobody could really make sense of it. So later on, after the ordinance of 1785, what starts to happen is townships and ranges, or a grid rectangular survey system, was established to basically determine the shapes of our states, the shapes of counties and cities and things like this. And you can see this more predominant the further west that you go into the United States of America. So those are the two main ways that people have divided up land in the U.S. And it reflects our history and how things have changed over time. It also kind of impacts, or I guess reflects the growth of agriculture in the United States, because as time progressed and people were continuing to try to settle back further and further west, eventually they're going to start giving away land in the United States for people to do that. And so you got some of those farmers that were out of jobs in Great Britain start to go overseas and try to find new land that they can kind of start over anew. And these new lands were easily organized and divvied up using the rectangular survey system, or the township and range system that you guys all need to be familiar with for the AP Human Geography exam.